All right, we are live. Come get your headsets if you want to listen to this session. There's been a lot of talk about how batteries work. Today, we're going to talk about how to put batteries to work, how to actually get them integrated into your projects. Our guest today has had a ton of experience with just that. Chris Finley is Chief Commercial Officer of a new business called TruGrid, which is no stranger, nevertheless, to batteries and battery integration, having done a lot of work with SunGrid, a company that TruGrid was spun out of. 20 years of experience leading design, construction, management, and business development in the renewable energy sector. Chris has worked on several gigawatts of award-winning projects across 16 countries. So we're not going to talk about battery technology and how batteries are evolving. We're going to talk about battery storage projects and how to make sure they get built in the right way. If you want headsets like this young man right here, just come down and grab a headset. It'll help you tune in to our conversation, tune out the din of the rest of the audience. If I'm too loud in your ears, you can turn the volume down on your headset. I apologize. I do sometimes project. You guys are supposed to tell me if I'm speaking too loud. All right, perfect. So, Chris, I am super excited about this conversation because all week we've been talking about the amp hours and the cells and whether we can fit it all in a 20-foot high cube. And you got a whole lot more aspect around how the EPC really thinks about this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Nico. I appreciate you having us on and everything you do with the Sun Media platform. It's been awesome. In the EPC space, I think battery is still kind of a black box opportunity for us to pivot as contractors, really understand not just the ins and outs of what's affecting the supply chain in or around it, but how developers and utilities are monetizing these things, and essentially how can we come with a value proposition, a solution to meet the needs that the end user either knows they have or they don't.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Chris, for those who are unfamiliar at an EPC level, the work that you guys are doing, explain for folks the problem that you've created TruGrid to solve specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. So TruGrid is more or less a rebrand of a company that was SunGrid under the Whole Street Energy umbrella of companies. Whole Street being a private equity firm that focuses on decarbonized platforms. As the only EPC involved under the Whole Street Energy umbrella, we essentially decided that, hey, we were doing a lot of really great niche work, solving problems in rural areas and special use cases, but that transition is just not happening as quick enough on the large scale, right? And we had a lot of experience within the SunGrid group on the integration and software piece, which I think is a very rare thing when you talk about the big stay EPCs and what they do and how they manage these things. So that integration piece carried over into TruGrid is really what we're focused on as an EPC. We're still that mainstay safety protocol, that labor provider and strategist, best-in-class supply chain opportunity. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we have to be a little bit more intentional on the front end, on the integration plan, and taking more of the accountability for what seems to be a lot of scope gap and scope creep throughout the integration supply chain piece of it.
Let's talk about, there are pain points across the spectrum of integration of batteries. Where do you see storage integration, particularly related to how it is being built, the EPC portion of it, that IPPs and even developers have expressed? These are true pain points that they're struggling to accomplish or to resolve.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, setting the actual equipment, landing the terminations, doing the civil work, these are very simple in terms of the context of EPC work and infrastructure work, right? Where a lot of our clients are tripping up right now and seeking solutions from us is how to streamline that back end around commissioning. When you have a EMS provider, a BMS provider, maybe a separate DC block, a PCS, all of this has to coalesce into one operating system. You have to get everything talking to each other first and then talking to the RTech. It becomes a software integration and architect challenge, right? So we don't want to be sitting on our hands when it comes to that point. We are a bit more proactive in instituting plans ahead of time as far as even bench testing, rather, a subset of equipment and deploying our software solution well before we actually have to ship it to the site, let alone land it.
Over the past few years, energy storage has started to be recognized, obviously, as a key part of how we think about solar projects, right? Almost every project, certainly in states like Texas and California, increasingly in New York, have storage attached. What do you think is still holding the industry back then from really exploiting the opportunity that's before us?
You know, if you'd asked 2 or 3 years ago, it would be that nobody knows what they're doing with this opportunity for dispatchable
Nobody
power.
can monetize it.
Yeah, absolutely. People are starting to figure out which regions and which use cases follow suit, how to monetize it, how to make sure that augmentation plans are in terms for long-term redundancy and resiliency, and ensuring that they are checking the boxes with all the financiers, things of that nature. But again, going back to how it actually coalesces and how we help developers and IPPs put the plan together up front, we really need to identify who is playing in what swim lane,
Right.
and make those guys and gals champions of that.
Integration is an area where there have been specialists for years in each type of construction technology, right?
Sure.
And we saw a lot of general contractors sort of hit their, skin their knees, so to speak, trying to get into solar, where solar-specific contractors excelled. You've got companies that have been able to pivot, right? Solve being one of them that sort of came from general contracting to become a major PV integrator. With storage, we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen that deep specialization. Is that the square peg that you guys are trying to fit into specifically with the EPC sector with TruGrid?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get us wrong. We know there are plenty of really good tier one EPCs that came from that background of traditional infrastructure, roadways and generating stations of all sorts, right? And they want to manage the supply chain risk. They want to manage the engineering. They want to construct it. I think we're all just a little gun shy as old school contractors on, hey, I'm going to have to look at ones and zeros on a screen at some point and figure out what's going on, and not just rely on the individual vendors who are coming together. We have to play quarterback. In some cases, we may be more of an offensive coach at times, just kind of laying out the game plan and making sure it all connects. But we're going into a new season for sure for EPCs on the clean tech side. Generating is one thing, wind, solar, it very well progressed over the last 20 years. But, for one, where are electrons coming to land on these batteries? How are we dispatching them? Are we good facilitating and backstopping the existing infrastructure, which may be more coil, gas, nuclear, things of that nature? Or how can we actually lean into the clean side of things and ensure that we're delivering the energy that we're producing with those clean generators?
Yep. As the EPC on a project, one of the things that you're most tasked with is to reduce the time to contract, right? So the contract gives you a certain period, and then they need to be generating dollars and cents on that revenue contract. How do you overcome some of the hurdles that we have in the industry right now of taking these projects from concept through to completion and getting these battery storage projects really generating revenue?
Yeah, great question. So I would say even in the last 48 hours, the number one issue that I'm hearing from our client base is, hey, we had a really great EPC. They did a really good job at deploying, but we are stuck in a commissioning black hole.
Oh, wow.
We cannot get things turned on, moving, operating accurately. And it's obviously an issue for the EPC. There's blade damages, things of that nature. But you still have a utility or an IPP looking to monetize that site as quickly as possible. So how do you cover those additional ancillary damages that maybe the EPC contract doesn't cover? Well, we think it's a simple solution. Again, preemptively and intentionally designing the integration plan well in advance of the point at which we'll actually deploy any of the equipment.
Right. Yeah, asset viability, of course, and return on investment is a big question for a lot of these IPPs. The storage owners are wondering, what are the risks of adding storage to my project, and can I validate that this is an asset class outside of Texas? Right? Let's everybody is convinced that Texas and as a deregulated market makes sense. How do we make sure that those dollars really be putting in the projects that make sense long term?
We wouldn't have a single simple answer for that, other than the fact that a good EPC who's focusing on such a niche industry and generator or battery class is going to be one that can pivot with you and take a look at the unique circumstances of the region or the pro forma in general, facilitate near-term constraints that exist in that same region, how to pivot and adapt and overcome those. And in some cases, they don't pencil out.
Yeah.
And we want to be that, that partner that provides that level of quantification and qualification as well.
Yeah, so you're often the layer between development and owner that helps to tick the boxes and checklist, effectively validating the asset as a ready-to-go kind of asset.
Absolutely. And there's few of us, or several of us, I should say, in that accountability role, right?
Okay.
You have the owner, you have an owner's engineer in a lot of cases. Maybe there's another third party from the tax equity or financing folks, and then there's us. And, our role is to make sure that it's practical in terms of execution.
That it's doable.
Exactly.
Makes sense. The supply chain for bringing all this together ultimately falls on the shoulders of the EPC, right? The developer comes up with the land, the rights, even the contract, hands it off to you, the EPC. Your job is to execute on making sure that what was signed into law, so to speak, gets delivered and gets delivered on time. What are the struggles that are specific to energy storage related to logistics, trade policy, even national security that you have to think about?
Yeah. Well, I think it correlates a lot with solar, for instance.
Okay.
I mean, we have a lot of overseas suppliers, a lot of manufacturers of not just the DC blocks, but the PCSs. We're all recovering from the pandemic fallout. We're all dealing with the same level of hurdles. I think what a lot of the larger volume distribution groups from the solar side are learning right now correlate a lot to what we do on the battery side of things.
Okay.
And I say that they're one side or the other side. We actually will do solar and battery projects. So a lot of the lessons learned from one technology will be applied to the other in supply chain engineering as well as how we construct it.
What are some of the more common, or maybe what are some of the less obvious ways that learnings from solar translate to battery storage?
Less obvious. Maybe you can expand on the question a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, how to get the battery into the U.S. There's a logistics supply chain constraint there, but it's typically coming through the same type of import process. Right. Are there areas with regards to how battery storage gets built that maybe to the traditional solar EPC are non-obvious? Areas where the projects do get stalled, they get hung up.
Yeah. Well, I think if you're an intentional EPC doing solar or storage, maybe you step away from putting the onus of the import risk directly on the vendor and maybe take that on as part of your IP. Okay. Right? A little bit more of a logistics focus. I think just the same way that we do the integration piece, a successful EPC is going to be very hands-on, roll their sleeve up, get invasive on all of the risk profiles. It's not just about delivering the plan set, procuring and delivering on a DDP basis and then constructing. We are active partners.
Yes. So I hear that as opposed to what is typical, pushing the risk down to the vendors, you believe that EPCs should be taking on more of that risk upstream and really owning that for your customer.
I think there's a value for the project in general. Right. And on a case-by-case basis. There are certainly some instances, some ports, some labor disputes happening with longshoremen that you want to be privy to, which again just goes back to your strategy on logistics. Do you bring it in someplace else, or all sorts of things? But your EPC needs to be able to pivot, needs to be able to provide solutions.
Let's talk O&M and in particular safety, because that ultimately comes down to how it's built and who owns who has the contract at the end of the day for making sure that every minute is delivering power. Asset owners struggle with, the perception in the community that energy storage can be dangerous. Words like lithium ion now become trigger words for potential fire hazards in the community. Smoke in the air, as was the case here last week in Southern California. Yeah. So what can those communities and companies that you represent and companies like TruGrid do to help with this image? And what do you see the industry doing to address how we maintain and manage these assets?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are fortunate enough as an EPC to have an O&M division, and I think a lot of that, again, goes to the accountability that we believe we have on a project long-term and creating that feedback loop on what might fail and how to preemptively get in front of that. Yeah. Now, in terms of the market in general, there has been quite a bit of unfortunate, thermal events as they throw it out there, right? But you can't be complacent and just rely on the local AHJ to try to figure it out. I mean, corrective actions, root cause analysis. As an EPC, we would want to be involved in that with the vendors that we selected and procured from, work with the local AHJ, the local fire department, and certainly all of the larger scale specification groups, things of that nature, to ensure that we're not just solving for today's failure, but putting a plan out for safety and operations in the future.
A lot of developers will go out and do procurement calls, and they'll get pricing on modules and batteries, et cetera. Generally speaking, I think there's a misconception that what the developer spec'd into the project is what's going to get built. It's there is the scenario where that is true, but could you help sort of disintermediate this misunderstanding in the marketplace where maybe manufacturers rightly believe they've got a project locked up and then an EPC steps in and they decide to go in a different direction? How does that work in terms of who gets the ultimate say and what gets built on that project?
Again, great question. Us being the real-time subject matter experts at any given time, and I say given time in terms of the period of time that you would design and procure the equipment, we get to bring that additional value and insight to the discussion with the developer. The developer might have a longer-term agreement, strategic, on a portfolio that exists beyond the EPC agreement that we have with them on one project. So we want to be, certainly careful about how that, has been constructed and is operating. But again, we're a partner. We don't want to be complacent. We don't want to say, developer, you've made the best possible decision and we're just going to build it for you. That doesn't feel like, I don't know, the home builder that I would hire to build my house. I want them to challenge me on the practicality of the components, the infrastructure of that home for sure. So as a consumer, I guess you would baseline it that way.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot for a second and ask, is there an area where you routinely see that as the EPC, you are helping that owner modify, design, and rethink their, I'll call it design decisions?
No, absolutely. I think us at TruGrid, as a relatively smaller EPC, have found a lot of opportunity with smaller organizations that may be just a bit less sophisticated on the procurement and design side of things. So we're actually stepping further into the development cycle, which is really sweet for us.
Makes sense.
Yeah, we get to complement, we get to share real-time data. It's not a projection on what this company is going to do in the future, what that company is going to do in the future. They get to see from our feedback loop, not just constructing projects currently, but how we're operating, why we would strategize on a certain subset of equipment.
So there's been a lot of talk today and yesterday about the increasing density. CATL announced that they have a 6.5 megawatt hour battery. CPS has the first, they sort of brought to market the first 5 megawatt hour battery. It seems like every week everyone's this brinkmanship of skipping over one another in size. We just had Andy Tang from Ortilla say, as you go from 280 amp hour to 300 plus amp hour, the linear thermal curve is not linear. It doesn't go at the same rate in terms of thermal effect with each amp hour added. It actually increases. There's a lot, kind of almost a logarithmic effect. I'm curious, as you look out to the projects that no doubt you are already, as you just insinuated, helping developers think through that are going to come online 27 and 28 all the way out to 30. What do you foresee as the natural market evolution in terms of what types of storage products IPPs are going to be asking for, or in fact are already beginning to require?
Yeah, again, great question. I mean, what we are talking about is the density related to one specific chemistry, right?
That's right, so, LFP.
Yeah. There's other chemistries out there, maybe not as cost-effective, maybe as cost-effective, just not as reliable or abundant. I would say that, if there was anything really hunkering down the industry, outside of everybody figuring out how they take their part in the supply chain, it's, what are we going to settle on for the actual chemistry in and of itself? I mean, EVs are still a big demand on LFP. So the long and short of it is, we love to see the higher energy densities as long as the companies are bankable enough to support the operations. We as an EPC, and I think any of our EPC competitors would be the first to tell you, we never want serial number one of a new technology, especially one so prone to high-level thermal events. But we're willing to get out there and figure out how to bifurcate the risk in a way that makes sense to test, because we do need to test new technologies, new densities, and ensuring as an industry that we're progressing.
Chris, I wonder, as someone who is at the choke point of how these projects get to the finish line, do you have any advice, as parting words of advice for developers out there who are trying to figure out, how do I pick a good EPC vendor or a good EPC partner? How do I work in a manner that's efficient with my team? Nobody likes to have selected products only to see their EPC partner basically strip all of that out. I mean, they're happy to have gotten their developer fee perhaps, and they're walking away and they just wash their hands of it. But I think that there's an opportunity here for developers to mature in how they do their product selection and also in their partner selection. Do you have any advice for those folks in your parting words?
I think it's some advice, maybe more common sense. I mean, the project starts at the inception of a developer looking at a piece of land and finding a nodal point that maybe makes sense, right? All the way out to the end of life of operations.
Yeah.
EPC, we're a tiny little piece that exists for maybe a couple of years within that, but we bring a lot of value on the real-time aspect of the approach of safety, cost, all the logistics concerns, the administration concerns that we deal with on any given year. Bring us in a little bit sooner, because we are a community within this supply chain that 20 to 30 years of operation. And, the compartmentalization, I don't think is going to be helpful to the transition long term. Yeah,
absolutely. And something I see as a trend is more developers are getting, let's say, they're getting an idea of where the market is, and they make zero commitments to vendors.
Oh, yeah.
They commit to an EPC first. It's exciting to see that the market is specializing, that companies like SunGrid are really turning their focus towards the battery storage market as the long tail. It's no longer the tail wagging the dog.
Absolutely.
It's an entire market in and of itself, increasingly now driven by policy. And I think that's a good thing. I think we have a margin of control over that we didn't have before. And it's encouraging to see folks like yourself that have a long pedigree of building these solar assets really turn your focus to helping the battery storage market and even standalone storage mature. So thank you for shedding some light on how the EPC piece of this works.
Absolutely, Nico. Thank you so much.
Chris Finley from TruGrid, formerly SunGrid.